So the reproductive lives of women are conspicuously cyclic. They include the reproductive cycle, which is a sequence of events that goes from fertilization to giving birth, and the sexual cycle, which are the events that reoccur every month if pregnancy doesn't intervene. The sexual cycle consists of two interrelated cycles. They're both controlled by shifting patterns of hormone secretion. They're the ovarian cycle, which are events in the ovaries, and the menstrual cycle, which are parallel changes in the uterus. So the process of oogenesis is very similar to that of spermatogenesis in that it parallels meiosis. We produce haploid gametes, and it's a distinctly cyclic event that releases one egg each month. Occasionally you release one from each ovary, and that can result in twins. But it's accompanied by cyclic changes in hormone secretion, and these cyclic changes have influences on the uterine condition. The uterine changes result in a monthly menstrual flow, which has a number of different possible functions. Embryonic development of the ovary begins very much like embryonic development of the testes, in that the female germ cells arise from the yolk sac, just as the male germ cells arose from the yolk sac, and they colonize the gonadal ridges in the first 5 or 6 weeks of development. They differentiate into oogonia and multiply until the 5th month. This is where all the multiplication, all the mitosis of these original germ cells occurs. We'll get as many as 5 to 6 million oogonia. Keep in mind, they have not yet undergone meiosis. These oogonia will transform into primary oocytes. The process of differentiation is complete by the time of birth, and then it's about producing primary oocytes that begin the process of meiosis. All of this is complete by about 6 months of age. At this point, the oocytes are in arrested development. No further maturation will occur until puberty. Most of the cells are going to degenerate in the process of atresia. This whole time, the process of atresia is occurring, which is degeneration of some of these primary oocytes. Many of them are gone by the time a girl is born. And by the time we reach puberty, there's only about 400,000 oocytes remaining. Now, this seems like a big cut. However, it's certainly a lifetime supply. Let's say that a woman ovulates every single month between the ages of 14 and 50. She'd still only ovulate about 480 times, so 400,000 is plenty. Now, the egg development doesn't resume until adolescence, at which time the GnRH levels have increased, and that stimulates FSH. FSH stimulates cohorts of oocytes to complete meiosis 1 each monthly cycle. Each oocyte divides into 2 haploid daughter cells of unequal size and different destinies. We'll check that out soon. It's important for a female to produce an egg with as much cytoplasm as possible, being as those are going to be the nutrients for all of the first cell divisions. If it's fertilized, it's got to divide repeatedly and produce numerous daughter cells. If it wasn't large, they would become very tiny cells. The secondary oocyte is a large daughter cell that's the product of meiosis 1. So you have unequal division of the cytoplasm. It's illustrated here, where we end up with one secondary oocyte and the first polar body. It's a small one. Sometimes it undergoes meiosis too, but ultimately they'll disintegrate. It's merely a means of discarding this extra set of chromosomes because we need to have all of the cytoplasm in the egg. The secondary oocyte proceeds as far as metaphase 2. at which point it's arrested until after ovulation. If it's not fertilized, it dies and never finishes meiosis. If it is fertilized, it quickly completes meiosis too and casts off a second polar body. So we're left with only one real size egg and 3 polar bodies. And the chromosomes of the large remaining egg will unite with those of the sperm. So as the egg undergoes oogenesis, the follicle around it undergoes developments called folliculogenesis. First of all, primordial follicles are follicles that consist of a primary oocyte in early meiosis. You can see the primordial follicle right here. It's surrounded by a single layer of squamous follicular cells. And the follicular cells are connected to the oocyte by a fine cytoplasmic process for passage of nutrient and chemical signals from the follicle to the egg. These primordial follicles are concentrated in the cortex of the ovary. Most of them wait 13 to 50 years before they develop any further. They have to wait for an ovulation. The adult ovary has 90% to 95% primordial follicles because only a select group are selected each month to undergo the next stages of maturation. If they are selected for a monthly cohort, they'll become primary follicles. You can see primary follicles here. The primary follicles have larger oocytes and follicular cells that still form a single layer. Shortly, they'll become secondary follicles. The secondary follicles contain larger oocytes, and the follicular cells now become stratified. We call them granulosa cells. We'll see a couple of different layers. The zona pellucida, which is a layer of glycoprotein gel that's secreted by the granulosa cells around the oocyte. And then the theca folliculi, which is a connective tissue around the granulosa cells, and it condenses to form a fibrous husk. Then we have the tertiary follicles. The granulosa cells of the tertiary follicles begin secreting follicular fluid. It accumulates in little pools in the follicular wall. This is what defines tertiary follicles. As they enlarge, the pools merge and they form a single fluid-filled cavity called the antrum, seen here. Tertiary and mature follicles are called antral follicles. In earlier stages of follicular development, they're called pre-antral follicles. The cumulus oophorus covers the oocyte and secures it to the follicular wall. The innermost layer of cells in the cumulus surrounding the zona pellucida and the oocyte is called the corona radiata, which forms a protective barrier around the egg with a similar function as the blood testes barrier. The theca folliculi continues to differentiate, forming 2 layers, the theca externa and the theca interna. The theca externa is a fibrous capsule that's rich in blood vessels, whereas the interna is an inner cellular hormone-secreting layer that produces androgens, androstenedione, and testosterone, and the granulosa cells convert those to estradiol. Now, only one of this cohort of chosen oocytes will develop into a mature or Graafian follicle. This one is destined to ovulate. The remainder of them degenerate. Here you can see a micrograph of the mature Graafian follicle. We have this layer of granulosa cells and the layer of the theca. We have the antrum, the fluid inside, the oocyte nucleus, the whole oocyte itself, surrounded by the cumulus oophorus and attached to the granulosa cells by a little stalk. So this concludes the section on oogenesis. Take a moment here to diagram out the process of oogenesis. So take a moment here to diagram out the process of oogenesis and its corresponding follicular phases. Keep in mind where we are in the process of meiosis during each of these phases. After you've completed your diagram, let's meet up again and we'll discuss the sexual cycle.